Right here for a second.
I'd like to call a meeting of the North Highlands Recreation Park District to order. Second item is approval of the minutes. We are going to hold off on that for a moment because our third board member is walking in right now.
Chairperson report. You can go ahead if you've got something.
Yeah, I don't, for the chairperson's report, I don't believe I have anything.
Are you going to comments from board members now? or-
Yeah, let's go to comments
Okay,
report.
I just have one question. So we got a page for the new administrative leave. This is effective July 1, right?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay, it didn't, I don't see where it's set.
Oh, I didn't do the revision on it.
Okay, that's it. I just wanted to
That's my
clarify, that. Thanks.
Okay, let's go back to, now that we have a quorum, we're going to go back to item number 2, approval of minutes. So, does anyone have any questions, corrections to the June 13th regular board meeting minutes?
So moved.
Second that.
Got a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Reports from standing committees. Did anyone meet this month?
No.
Didn't
No, I
think so. Administrator's report. Larry, is there anything you'd like to highlight?
Well, just to let you know that I think I kind of highlighted in the revenue report that as of today, and between now and the final budget, the numbers change, but they've been changing on positive for us. The revenue in excess of budget is about $125,000, and our carryover is about is that 2 or 3?
No,
300,000. So we're doing fine.
Okay.
And we'll have this final numbers in August.
Awesome. Thank you. Is there anything else?
I don't think so.
All right. Scott, is there anything you'd like to highlight in your report?
Well, I'd like to point out that after 5 long months, our facilities maintenance supervisor, Sean Kearns, will be returning to work on Monday. So
Yay.
he's had a surgery, he's been cleared for limited duty, so we'll be kind of taking our time and moving forward.
40 hours or still limited?
40 hours,
Okay.
just physical limitations
Right.
on what he can
Okay.
do. But we're excited to have Sean back.
Oh, that's cool. All
All right, any other questions or comments for Scott? All right, Mark, what's going on?
I don't have anything else to add that's not in my report, but you guys have any questions?
right. Did you get yourself in the photo or not?
I did not drop myself in this year.
Just checking.
All right, any more?
So they still,
They're still dominating.
Okay.
They got meet this weekend in Rio Vista, which will probably be the biggest challenge just because it's so far away for travel.
right.
But after that, it's been a great successful season.
I remember going down to golf where we lost probably 20-30%. People, I don't want to go that far.
It's far.
Yeah, you're farther. So, good luck.
Yep.
All right, thank you. Anything else? All right. Terry, because Alan doesn't want me to leave you out.
No.
So, all right, thank you. Item number 7, correspondence, letter dated June 26, 2019 from Kim Brown, Executive Director of Love Action International, regarding the National Night Out and Kids Night request for use of Freedom Park. That is under new business item 10A. So item 8, comments and reports from citizens and organizations. We miss you. Please come. We'll see you next month. Item 9, unfinished business. There isn't any. Item 10A, the National Night Out and Kids Night request for use of Freedom Park. So Larry, is there anything you'd like to highlight on that?
Just to remind the board that this is, I think, the third time that this group has come and made this request, and we've honored that request for use of the park at no cost. and I'm recommending that we do the same thing this year.
I had one question in regards to that. She was asking for tables and chairs. Does that when we go to vote to waive the fees on the park, is that included in?
No,
the request?
that she gave a list of all the things that she needs for her event,
Mhm.
and she wasn't looking for us to provide all those things.
Okay,
But I thought our offer was fair and that it's about a $700 value.
okay.
I'm a little reluctant this time to recommend letting outside groups use our tables and chairs. Right now, they're kind of earmarked for the swim team, which means we have to get them out of their storage area, bring them over here, and somebody has to be there afterwards to come get them. She seems to have been able to get them from someplace else in previous years, so at this point, I'm just recommending the use of the park at no fee.
Almost staff's recommendation.
Second that motion.
Got a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Motion passes. Item 10B, the Lakes at Antelope Community Facility District. Board discussion, no action required at this time. So Blair, is this where you're up to do a presentation, or Larry, do you want to?
Opening comments?
Just a couple of comments that I think is pretty straightforward and just in my report. We just reminded you a little bit about the project. This is going to sound very similar tonight to what you heard about three and a half years ago when we started the CFD for the Alberta Park project. And we used SCI and Blair for forming the CFD for that project, and I thought it went rather well. And so we contracted with SCI to do so again. The only difference this time is that the developer fronted the money for Alberta Park for the CFD. We're fronting it, but we will then collect the fees back at a later time, but we'll be made whole. And so I'll just turn it over to Blair.
Thank you, Larry. Good evening. So I prepared just about 6 or 7 slides just to sort of summarize the information, sort of facilitate my presentation and our discussion on the proposed CFD. Just to start, high level again, about 13 years ago, when the housing market was really heating up, we were working with Kay Dayhill, and the district was working to prepare for all of that new development. And out of that, as you know, that new development didn't happen because the housing market turned downward. But out of that original effort in preparing for all that development, we helped the district and working with the county to establish conditions of approval on some development projects and ask them to mitigate their impact on the district by mitigating their impact on providing for the formation of a financing district to provide supplemental money to help you maintain and replace the facilities that are needed for those developments. And so those conditions now that the housing market has turned back around, those development projects, one was Alberta Park and now the Lakes at Antelope, those conditions are now in front of those developers, and now that's presenting you those opportunities to form the CFD. So just about the Lakes at Antelope. So you all know where it's located. It's about 60 acres, and it will create, there will be, at build out of the development, there'll be 273 residential lots. So what's important here is, using some information that we received from the U.S. Census, we are estimating that there will be about 830 new residents created from that development project. And why that's important for the purposes of this CFD is that based upon your master plan, you have a master plan standard of 5 acres needing 5 acres of neighborhood and community parks for every 1,000 residents, that would translate out to this development project is creating the need for approximately, I think it was just at 4 acres of neighborhood and community parks. So that to maintain your master plan standard. And so, as you're certainly aware, the lakes at Antelope, I'm trying to refresh the details, but they opted not to put the park within the subdivision.
Correct.
And so, it'll be, the neighborhood park that will serve that subdivision will be outside of the park. But we're estimating whether that neighborhood park is 5 acres, 7 acres, what would be, once that park is developed, their fair share would probably be about 4 acres of the, let's say, the 7 acre park. And so that's why that statistic is sort of important. This is the boundary map of the project, as you're aware. So this, and again, the CFD is very similar to the CFD for Alberta Park. It's providing for the annual operation, maintenance, and servicing. In the case of Alberta Park, it was the Alberta Park within the subdivision. Here, we're saying that it's the annual operation, maintenance, and servicing of 4 acres of the neighborhood park and community parks that would be servicing that district, is essentially what we're saying here. So it's just a little bit different. And again, keep in mind that we've also incorporated a contribution to replacement of those park facilities within the subdivision. And in both of those costs, we relied heavily upon the great work that was done for Alberta Park, indexed it up to today dollars. So I think it's reasonable, and I don't think Larry Lucero has really got into that or questioned that. I think it was referenced in the report. But we were effectively saying, hey, we just built a neighborhood park, so we know what these costs are, and we know what the replacement costs are. So we're using that as a sort of a model for estimating the cost of that future park. So those are the 2 cost components, and then of course incidental costs, the cost of county collection of the tax and annual administration and reporting, all those reporting costs. We've also incorporated that you can recover the cost of the formation cost itself, the work that we're doing right now. You'll be able to recover that over time. As you prepare that budget, you can just you can recover those costs over time.
So do you know how long that gets recovered? I'm assuming it's like an amortized cost over X amount of years, but.
Yeah, right now we haven't specified that in the CFD document. We certainly can.
Okay.
But we've sort of left that flexible to the district that you can recover it.
Okay.
You still have the other budget.
Kind of standard that's usually done?
No,
Okay.
I just did one for the city of Lompoc, and we did it over 5 years.
Okay. Okay, it gives you an idea. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, with this, with the CFD, I know that often the public agencies that are forming the CFD, that one of your top objectives beyond just the money is flexibility. Flexibility and the use and everything else. And the developers and the landowners that are going to approve the CFD are wanting assurances. So they want to make sure that you're not padding Larry's salary, with the money or something. They want to make sure that it's going to accomplish what it intended to do. And so the conversation between the district and the developers is often about we want flexibility versus they want assurances. And so just know that there's an ability and a flexibility to modify the language in the in the rate and method of apportionment, which is one of the appendices of the document that you've been provided. There's a lot of, you can put a lot of language in there to provide for flexibility or assurances. We have a lot of leeway there.
So let me ask you a scenario. So let's assume that Sierra Creek Park is about 8 acres. So if we would track what the cost after that gets built out, obviously, and we would track the annual cost, then theoretically half of that can go to the CFD then?
Yes.
Okay. Good luck with that, Terry.
Yeah, so on, and again, Larry, correct me if I misspeak, but the lakes at Antelope, we had 2 conditions. So one condition had to, as you're well aware, one condition had to do with the park impact fees and the Quimby fees, and then the other one was mitigating their impacts by forming the CFD. And so the development projects is going to be providing Quimby and lieu fees and also park impact fees. So that's my understanding is largely the money that's going to allow you to build Sierra Creek Park, which according to Larry Lucero, that's an appropriate park to be able to service their development. But as Larry and I were talking, that has been identified, but it's still likely
Right.
that it doesn't get built out. There's a remote chance that you could do some other things, and so we wanted to allow you that flexibility. So I actually originally wrote the language that the services would be to operation, maintenance, servicing of future neighborhood and community parks serving the project. And Larry came back, the other Larry, came back and it had said, we wanted to specify the park, specifically the parks. And so what we've done is just modified it. It doesn't affect anything, but we've modified it saying that it'll be used for the maintenance of Sierra Creek Park or a comparable park that's servicing the project, and community park facilities, because you might have a community park that's servicing that subdivision, and you might want to expand that park, and so you could potentially use funding from this CFD for that as well. Here's the reason why you can't just take, levy the tax and then just put it into your money. That is one of the requirements for a landowner CFD election is that these services, and this is specific to services, but the services that are going to be provided can't be services that you're already providing, right? So you need to be providing additional services. So that's why this money has to be dedicated to future parks, right? So that's why we have it that structured. So it's possible that this CFD could be formed this year, but you're not going to collect on it until Sierra Creek Park is actually developed and you have those maintenance costs, which is okay. But again, so Sierra Creek Park or a comparable future park site. So that's the language that I left. I think just before the board packet went out, I think Larry came back and the other Larry came back and indicated, well, we want it identified and it should be a quarter of an acre from a quarter mile from the park. And we know that neighborhood parks, the standard is a quarter to a half, but yet that's just a guideline. Sometimes there just doesn't allow for you to have that distance. And so I think that this is reasonable. I mean, you could probably put a probability on it at Sierra Creek Park, but you don't want to lock yourself into anything. And so I think if we get just a little bit more time with Larry and talk with it, I think that should be sufficient.
Can I just weigh in on that just a little bit? I just want to brief the board a little deeper with this. originally there were 6 issues that the developer brought up. Blair was able to mitigate 4 of those rather quickly.
And mitigating it just by modifying the
It's a language, so that he, till
just
reached the
to
point where
provide
he was
those
comfortable,
assurances.
we were comfortable with it. The way that Blair modified the issue about future park site, as he said, it didn't include Sierra Creek Park, it just talked about a neighborhood park or community park. But the developer wanted specifically to be Sierra Creek Park. I had a bit of an issue with that because Quimby doesn't state that. Quimby says it's up to the agency to determine. And what I'm concerned, and Blair and I talked about it, is that we don't lock the district into something that somewhere down the road as things change, we can't get out of it. I'll give you just a quick example, and I don't know if it could happen now, but you never know. What happens if the economy goes south and we get all this ready to go and no homes are built? But in the meantime, we receive a grant to build out Sierra Creek Park. So we build Sierra Creek Park. Okay, economy heats up again, they're building homes. Well, the language we put in there said that we can only use it for Sierra Creek Park. Now what do? How do we undo something? So that's why when Blair says we want some flexibility with this, and the developer has some problem with that. He doesn't like that language, but from my opinion, the Quimby Act gives us the authority to make those decisions, not the developer. So that's why we insist. I'm okay with the way that Blair wrote it because it says Sierra Creek Park or. I don't know if the developer will. He's told us that he doesn't like that. So we still have a little bit of work in front of us.
And just adding on to that, I think the compromise there is that the Quimby Act and the Mitigation Fee Act both require the district to expend those monies on parks that are going to benefit the development that paid the fees. There's a benefit requirement sort of for both of them. So you're obligated to build the park in an area that's going to serve that. So that's already, and I think that in the essence of what his issue is, he's just wanting assurances that it's going to go towards the park that's going to serve his neighborhood. And so it's already built in. There's already required to build it in that area. And I think just, and we've even talked about it, with him, but he's just wanting assurances that it's not going to be spent on the other side of town. So I think we'll be able to easily navigate that. So totaling all of this out, and again, based upon current costs of what it takes to maintain and repair and replace Alberta Park in today dollars, and that's important, we're estimating 4 acres of parks is about $124,000 all in. And so that provides the basis for the fee, which comes out to be about $453 per residential unit, and that's for the base year. So again, we also have structured it similar to Alberta Park, that it's tied to an inflationary, the consumer price index, and that it's going to be adjusted for inflation. And that's important because if you don't do that in 20 years, you're going to have enough money to maintain only 2 acres of park, when the intention was to maintain 4 acres of park. So you have to adjust that for inflation. And so that's the sort of the second issue that what we ran into with Larry. Surprisingly, I've never really had this issue before, but he the most common index for this type of adjusting services for inflation is the Bay Area CPI. His first reaction was, well, you need to use the Sacramento CPI. And I said, well, there isn't one.
I was going to say,
There isn't one, but hey, if you know of one, please let me know and we'll review it. And I think, the Bay Area CPI is actually the San Francisco, Oakland, Hayward CPI. And that's a common reaction you know, you get out into the foothills, we're not San Francisco, and sometimes I'm surprised that he doesn't, and I might just need to spend some more time educating him, but that's a Bay Area index, so I think it's certainly appropriate. Larry and I, just before we walked in, you know, we've formed, you know, of all these small districts, you know, hundreds of these small little districts, and we're always using the Bay Area CPI or the Los Angeles area CPI. Larry actually came back and proposed a CPI for the Western United States, and I took a quick glance at the annual change in that index, and it barely goes up 2% or even less, and where the Bay Area CPI is more like 2.5%, 3%. So what's more representative, a Bay Area index or a Western United States index? I mean, that's something for you to decide. My recommendation would be to maintain the Bay Area CPI. That's what was used for the other CFD. That's what's commonly used. I challenge them to actually, I mean, we could probably look at some other similar financing districts and see what they use, but my experience is that it's always the Bay Area CPI or the regional CPI for Cal. You know, there's a Southern California CPI as well.
The county uses the Bay Area CPI
Okay.
for pretty much everything they do.
Yeah.
Just to add to that, and Blair and I have talked quite a bit about this, and I'll give credit, he's more flexible or lenient or than I am. Accommodating, yeah, that's what it is. Because I did some research on the Western Region CPI. That includes 7 Western United States, Alaska, and Guam.
Yeah.
So when you throw all those in there, I don't know what the annual cost of living is for Guam, but it probably isn't anything like Sacramento. But when you average all that large region together, and I tracked it for 4 years, and it was tracking slightly below the Bay Area one that Blair mentioned. And I asked Blair the question, I said, of all the hundreds of these that you've put together over the years, how many times have you used the Western region? And it's 0.
Yeah.
So I see, and just to put it out there again, I'm not trying to be a stickler, but I have to look at these things. There's nothing in the development agreement, or the conditions of approval. There's nothing in the Quimby Act that says a developer can dictate what index you use. And I agree with Blair. I mean, this development is literally about a half mile from the other development. We use the Bay Area CPI for that. We should be consistent in how we do it. Otherwise, at some point in time, you could have 2 different neighborhoods saying, well, why are ours going up proportionally more than another? I don't understand why the developer feels strongly about that, because he's not paying it, it's the homeowner's paying it. But I have confidence in Blair that he's going to be able to work with the developer in a way that he will come to realize that it's in our best interest, and it makes sense to try to sell something that's not close to what we're dealing with. Does that make sense?
I have confidence. To me, these 2 issues are really straightforward, and they shouldn't be any issues. I think they're really resolvable. Just to go worst case scenario, keep in mind that you have taxing authority to actually form this financing district and levy it on your own authority. However, the condition is actually placed by the county. And so he could go to the county and say, you need to change that condition to state that it's Western cities, and he could ask for that, and depending upon what the county would do. So that's the thing that you need to be mindful of.
Since the county pretty much uses the Bay Area, so I don't think they would.
And then, keep in mind too that, there's other development going on in Sacramento that they have to fund the parks with their all the property tax revenue, and they don't get the opportunity for CFD like this. It's really a big bonus for you. So you don't want to risk that. But But I think it should be fine, so. And we, again, there's nothing for undeveloped property, and so the timing would work out as soon as there's a fiscal year where you anticipate maintenance of the park that's constructed, then you have what we call a special tax requirement, a revenue requirement. You have a budget now, you have a need, and then that's when you'll be able to levy the tax essentially.
I would think that based on what we know now, that's several years out.
Yeah. So just in the details, there's a maximum tax that's calculated, which is this base year tied and then adjusted annually for inflation. If that's approved, that would just be automatic, and you'd automatically calculate that. That wouldn't be something that you'd have discretion over. Your discretion would be in the annual rate that you set. And again, triggered by maintenance costs for the new park facilities, and we have the trigger when there's a building permit issued for new home construction before April 1st. So technically, if a home was constructed on April 2nd, you wouldn't collect that till the following fiscal year. So because you have to set some date which you consider the home to be developed, and you start to maintain it. So that's one of the little things. But other than that, so we'll try to we'll have another talk with Larry. We'd like to provide. I think we fairly represented Larry Lacero's issues. I think those were primarily the two issues. And I think he also wanted to have his legal counsel review the document we said, which is fine. But we'll go back to him and share your board direction. I mean, you're not taking any action tonight, but we just sort of wanted to get your informal feedback. And then the next step would be that, and we've already given him a draft, but we would actually send him a petition to formally request the board to initiate formation of the CFD. And then if they can get that done by the end of the month, I mean, it's relative, they've already been reviewing it. It's a relatively simple 2-page document. It shouldn't be anything that takes up a lot of lawyer time, but it should be relatively straightforward.
But if we don't get it by the end of the month, it's just going to push the
Right.
process out further.
Right. So if he takes 3 weeks to get it done, that should be sufficient time. But if he takes more, then we'll just push it out a date. But if we stay on the timeline, at the August 8th board meeting, you would adopt a resolution of intention to accept those petitions, preliminary approve the boundary map, and then initiate the proceedings. And then we would follow up there with then sending a landowner ballot to the developer, and we'd coordinate having the map recorded, and then we'd come back at the next board meeting. We have to have 30 days in between, but we have the next board meeting, and that's when if you recall, that's when you have all that action where you have the public hearing, and you actually take action to form the district, and then you call for an election, and conveniently the ballot's already is sitting on your desk, and so you canvass the ballots, or in this case the ballot, and you canvass the results, you announce the results, and then you declare the results with a resolution, and you're all done. So it's streamlined into 2 board meetings, but there's a lot of documents to provide, and so we've already got I'd say 40% of those documents already done and drafted and everything else, so we're ready to go.
One of the problems we ran into when we formed the CFD for Alberta Park was that 30-day in between, and I think we had a glitch where it was 29 days. And that, I don't know if you remember, but we actually had to have a special board meeting a week later so that we could go ahead and just take care of that item. So we just need to make sure that we keep that 30 days
Yeah, that's
in
fine.
between.
And that's what I was gonna say, we have or September 17th. Is that if something glitches or why?
I think actually that's actually sort of, I'm glad that you brought that up. I actually have another commitment on that date that I can't get out of. And I have colleagues in my office that certainly could help you with that process. But I'm not available on the 12th, but so just in case you did absolutely want me here, that might be an alternative. So we'll play it by ear.
Yeah, because I'm bringing it up because I'm out of town on the 17th, so
Okay.
I'm at a conference in.
I just picked
Colorado.
I arbitrarily
We
picked that date.
can pick a
As
special
long
meeting date.
as long as it's 30 days after
Yeah.
August 8th.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you remember that the tricky thing about the August board meeting is we need to get all the information back from the county
Right.
for the final
final
budget.
Yeah.
And over the last 2 or 3 years, we've had to move that date around a little bit to make sure, because we're dependent upon the county giving us that information. We
Yeah.
may be ready, but they're not ready.
We can always have the regular board meeting for this and have a special board meeting for the budget, because the budget just has to be done by August 31st.
Or maybe end up, we have to do the 12th doesn't work out, we can hold a regular meeting to do other district
Right.
business, and then have kick it down the road a week or so and do a special board meeting for this effort, and as well as the finalized budget. The finalized, as you know, as long as we get it done for the end of August, we're good.
And again, there's a lot of stuff at that second board meeting, but really it's all procedural. I mean, because once Larry and the landowner sign that petition, we're effectively, it's all done. I think probably one of Larry Lacero's other slight comments was, I think just reading between the lines, he just wanted to make sure that when they sign the petition, that there aren't going to be any changes to the CFD. And I assured him it's possible that could occur. We would certainly communicate with you, but likely not. It's all done by then. But I think that was one of he wanted some assurances there, so I just need to make him feel comfortable that, and again, I think the way I assured him was, well, that's just the petition, you're gonna actually be able to vote. So if the board doubles the tax,
Right.
at the last minute, well, you're gonna be able to just vote no. I mean, so they'll be able to see that, so.
Well, I think kind of the difference is between the two is that when we dealt with Silverado Homes, we're dealing directly with the landowner.
Right.
We're here dealing with the developer who's representing the landowner who's from out of the country. So there's a little bit of lag and somebody in between. So I'm sure the landowner wants to make sure that everything's buttoned up and that there are no changes, and that's why we're probably hearing from Larry, is that, because when you do that, it extends the process out, because we don't have the landowner living around the corner from us.
Right.
And part of this additional back and forth with Larry and some concern, I think, is that he is just as Larry had indicated, that they're looking to sell off the property. So they're trying to, how is this financing district going to be perceived by the buyer? And so I think they're a little bit more concerned, rather than Silverado was just let's go.
Let's just get it done.
Yeah.
So,
probably is.
speaking of the landlord, so I thought this was all one big parcel. I didn't realize this was 5 separate parcels.
Same family though.
I noticed that, but, so, I was always led to believe this was one, thing that was, EDC from, McClellan when the base closed, and then McClellan Business Park got it as one. So I didn't know it was split up, that's all I'm saying. When I read this, I was just kind of, when did this happen?
When they formed it, if you go on GIS, it's on there as 5 separate parcels.
Yeah, I just didn't realize they had done that.
Yeah, until I looked
So I
at
think
it.
probably when the last time it was sold to the current owners,
Right.
it's a family, so maybe they set it up so each one had a stake in the
But that could be.
process.
They might be subdividing it and selling it off to 5 different builders or something.
Right,
Something
right.
like that. Sometimes that'll happen. We'll
Yeah.
give KB Homes these 3 parcels and,
Right.
entitle him.
So the landowners live where?
China.
Okay.
Well, that's pretty much it, I think, yeah.
So as you know, as Blair mentioned, you're taking no action on this tonight. But if you felt strongly or you had any feelings about if you wanted this to go in a different direction, this would be the time to kind of verbalize that, because otherwise we're moving forward, and then Blair and I will work with Larry Lucero on those last two items. And if we're successful in getting them to agree with us the way it's been presented, then we would come back the next month and start the process as Blair described it. If not, then you'll know about that.
No, I mean, my opinion, everything looks good, and thanks for kind of laying things out for us. And I had a couple questions, but we got them all answered, so I'm good to go.
Yeah, and if it takes 4 or 5 months for the developer to fill out the petition, well, take as much time as you need. You can't develop until, you know, the only one thing that can sometimes put a wrench into this is that we do need, you know, that two to, you know, well, now it's really more like 2 months to be able to form the CFD. So if they're going to sell it off, we probably want to do it before they sell it off, or wait till they get the new developers.
Not the process.
And so you don't want, you have to either do it before or afterwards.
I was under the impression that when I talked to Larry a while back that they wanted this buttoned up so that they sell it as a package, so it's done, and any potential buyer knows exactly what they're getting themselves into.
Yeah.
I mean, nothing against Blair, but I'm good with somebody else being here from his office that day on the 12th, just to keep this going.
Well, I think, and Blair, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the biggest issue going forward is going to be, can we move these last two issues, this CPI index and the way its language is written about Sierra Creek Park and or other neighborhood or community parks, because again, as I just want to repeat to the board, that gives us the greatest flexibility, and that's what we want, because, you know, this development's been around for a very, very long time and been sold a number of times. If we come back 10 years from now and we find out we'd already developed out Sierra Creek Park, I don't know how that affects the action that you've taken if we said, yeah, only that park.
That's right.
So that's why, you know, Blair modified the language to say, yeah, this or something like that. I mean, we have no intention on building his park 3 miles away from this development. That wouldn't make any sense. No, I know, the one thing I wanted to bring up too is when it was mentioned by the developer that if we are not going to specifically say Sierra Creek Park, then he wants a park identified as within a ½ mile of his development. Well, if you do a Google overhead, there is no 4 acres.
No.
This is it. Unless something happens, again, it doesn't mean that somewhere down the road there 4 acres may come about.
You own Sierra, you own that site already, right?
Yeah,
7.51,
7.4,
7.4, okay.
give or take.
Yeah.
So that's what we have to do, and we, you know, if the developer doesn't like the language that we've proposed, then as Blair mentioned, hopefully we can work it out, but if it's not, then he has the right to vote no, and then we're kind of stuck. And, you know, it's my job to point out as many things as I can. One of the things I've shared with Blair is I've kind of becoming an expert on those 58 conditions of approval by the county, and it makes it very clear in there that if we don't resolve, if the district doesn't agree to the CFD, which we have, if he doesn't agree with the terms that we kind of put together, then we have a problem, because there's nothing that says that the developer can dictate the terms of the CFD. And so we hope it doesn't come to that, but we hope that by putting Sierra Creek's name in there, and again, as I've shared with Larry myself, I think it's, you know, we know what's the biggest piece of land that's closest to his development. We know we want to develop it. We're doing everything but saying it's exactly that piece of property, and that's simply because we have to give our district the greatest ability to have some flexibility.
It's fair to represent that the plan is to develop Sierra Creek Park, and there are no other plans for alternative sites. We're just on the one, you know, just don't, yeah, it's just a condition.
I would hope that he would understand that again, you know, knowing the history of this development, that it's been bought and sold many times, and there's still not, no earth has been turned over yet. And he also knows we're pursuing a grant to develop that park. So, because I doubt that his development's going to generate enough money to develop that park site. So we have to actively look for other funding sources, and it makes all the sense in the world. It's just, if you want me to say it's only that, that's the tough thing for me to say, yeah, I agree with that. Because that's not giving our district flexibility, and there's nothing in the conditions of approval, there's certainly nothing in the Quimby Act that says that a developer can dictate those terms.
So with your permission, we might revise the language. It's going to say the exact same thing, but if he wants it revised just a little bit so that it still says Sierra Creek Park or another site, I mean, I'm fine with that. It doesn't change anything. I mean, it didn't change it from the original language. It just, I mean, there's said future neighborhood parks surveying the project versus specific, you know, it doesn't change anything, but sometimes you need to do that just to finish the negotiations, I guess. If it is anything, it's negotiations, I don't know. But I think it'll be fine.
Seems to me this is only an issue if that development takes 10 years, then that's where we could really get burned by putting only Sierra Creek, because Sierra Creek might be developed in 3 years.
No, I wouldn't characterize it as that. I think what happens is, you know, even if we put Sierra Creek Park aside for a second, and we're just talking to any developer about this, for our district, we always want to have the greatest amount of flexibility. And, you know, Quimby's on our side. Quimby allows the district to dictate. In fact, it's very clear. It says, if, where, how, and when is our decision, not a developer's decision.
As long as it's benefiting the
As long as it meets, you know, it meets those conditions of being, you know, there's a nexus between the developer and that site and the proposed site. I can speak for the board. We don't have an interest in developing a park on the other side of town to reflect this. And this, putting all things on the table, the developer, whether it was this developer or prior developers, made the decision not to build a park on that development. So you kind of tied our hands by saying, okay, we have to do an off-site improvement. And Quimby says when that happens, you have the flexibility to determine when, where, and how, as long as, like Blair says, you still maintain that connection between the development. And we absolutely want to do that.
And the only thing that would speak to that from a legal perspective is your master plan, which says neighborhood parks should serve a community of a quarter to a half mile away. But that's a guideline. It does, sometimes if there's not available land, it might be just a little bit farther out, but that's a guideline. So it, you know.
I saw that too, and the only thing I thought was, you know, kind of the gray area, the unwritten language piece that comes into it is that it did take in consideration specifically the master plan that what happens if the development takes place and the developer chooses not to develop park sites as part of his development. Well, then I think whether it's the county that oversees this or not has to lean on our side and say, well, what else can we do? If you're not going to put it there, then you have to work with us. And as we've said a million times already, the most logical place is Sierra Creek Park. And all we're asking is, don't tie us in to say it has to say Sierra Creek Park only, because in that case, that puts the district in I think a huge disadvantage now and in the future, and we don't want to do that. We don't have to do that. So Blair and I will engage Larry again as soon as possible, and correct me if I'm wrong, we will, you have the draft preliminary document in your packet. We'll pursue that using that language. I think Blair and I are completely in agreement about going with the Bay Area CPI, which seems like an easy thing. I don't know why it became, of all the 6 things, I thought it was the easiest thing to go with, but I'm not sure what the motivation behind that is, but it's consistent with what we've done. It's right next to a half mile away from another CFD that we use that, and it doesn't make sense to throw in, well, we want to compare our CPI to that of Guam or Alaska. That doesn't make any sense at all. So, If there's anything else, Blair, then we'll,
Great.
let
We'll
me
keep
know.
working.
All right, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks, Blair, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right, item 10C, Proposition 68 grant application.
Before we start that, I'm gonna ask Terry to do me a favor. So Terry, tomorrow morning, can you go to Larry's computer and under Word, the settings, can you uncheck the box that says ignore words in all caps? Look at the header on the Prop 68.
I'm missing, what am I missing?
What is it with the very top line say?
North Highlands Recreation Park District?
Recreation,
Oh,
that's the stupidest thing that Word defaults ignore if it's in all caps.
gotcha.
That's the
Okay.
first thing when I get a new staff, we get computers, I tell them to go take that off. Because we have like subjects of memos, it's usually in all caps.
We have to tell Mark that because he's actually
The computer guy?
our
Yeah.
We can blame Mark.
Tomorrow
for
morning,
this.
that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, you might want to check everybody's computer. Sorry. Okay.
Since not me, it is.
Larry.
He did.
Yeah. Okay, so Prop 68.
So you received a memo from me last week or a week and a half ago or so, updating you on the status of Prop 68 grant. And I won't reiterate everything I said because I'd like to come back in September because I think we're going to have enough stuff going on in August and it may take me a little bit longer to get more information. But essentially what happened was I received a phone call over the weekend from Doug Houston, Houston and Associates, stating that there was some concern, not just with us, it's with all the applicants, about CEQA and the need to have a fully clean EIR before your project is approved for a grant. And I think I may have mentioned to you before in the memo or individually that the prior two state grants basically said that as long as your CEQA requirements were met at the time when you were funded, then you were good to go. What they're saying now is the CEQA requirements have to be completed as part of your application. Well, that threw a monkey wrench into a lot of things with a lot of agencies because a lot of ideas are just plans. In fact, I just shared with Scott that I read in today's paper in Grass Valley that they went to the city council last night and asked permission to apply for a Prop 68 grant so they could build 2 new parks. And they said, but we got to hurry because the deadline is August 5th. Well, they presented a idea, a concept. Well, we've done that many months ago. They haven't done CEQA, they haven't done all that stuff. So bottom line is for us, because we have the creek that is going to be an environmental issue, there's no question about that. There's things that live in that creek, whether it's seasonally or year-round, that's an issue. And when I read further about CEQA, that parking is a CEQA issue because of environmental impacts. And as you know, we really don't have a lot of parking options with that piece of land. So, in talking to Doug said, look, it's highly unlikely, in fact, it's probably impossible that you're going to be able to do all this stuff in 4 months. Because even though the deadline's August 5th, if you submitted your application, they give you 3 additional months as a grace period, but you have to prove that your CEQA requirements would be completed in the 3 months. Well, we can't guarantee that, and likelihood you can't do it in 3 months. So bottom line is there's 3 funding cycles. We're going to miss the first funding cycle. In fact, many public agencies are going to miss the first funding cycle because of this. And because of that, Cedric Mitchell, who is the state parks chief, he basically told Doug that the likelihood is we're going to fund rehabilitation projects in the first round. We're not a rehabilitation project. And shovel-ready projects, those that are already, CEQA's done, it's designed. They did stuff 5 years ago, it's been sitting on the shelf, and they can pull it off, dust it off, and they can be ready to go. So we'll be looking at having everything ready to go for the second funding cycle. We don't know when that second funding cycle is. It's not exactly a year after the first. It could be sooner. It's most likely going to be a little further out than that. So what I will do is come back in September, give you some cost estimates of what's going to take to hire a firm to work with the county to meet these requirements. And it could be that a lot of work has already been done because of the Lake Antelope project, which is the end of the creek issue. So it could be a lot of things that can be used from that. I'm not an expert in this area, so I'm not 100% sure. But I'll come back anyway in September and explain where we're at, what we need to do, and kind of lay out a roadmap so we can get there. Because whenever that second funding cycle occurs, I want our application, everything, all the requirements to be ready to go. And if it gives us a chance to go back and look at some areas that maybe we didn't score maximum points, if there's something else that we can do to improve that score, then I want to do that too. What I don't want to do is rush to get something together that's going to be rejected by the state in August. That just put something in and keep your fingers crossed when you know there's no chance. That doesn't seem like a smart thing to do.
So I have one question. So since this is going to affect a lot of other park entities, did they have a set amount of dollars for the first funding cycle?
They did.
So, I mean, there's a good chance that a lot of those are going to get funded then because they have X amount of money. I'm not going to stop talking. And fewer people going to be able to apply for it.
Well, there's two things to look at. I had this was actually my bone of contention with Doug, is that I've got a little tick, to be honest with you, and I told him he could relay my comments directly to Cedric Mitchell. And I'm not trying to blow it up proportion. I just wanted him to understand that by doing what they're doing, you were taking a chance of funding projects that normally would not have been funded in the first round because they would not have scored as high, but simply it's because they meet rehabilitation qualifications or they're shovel ready. But Doug's turn on it was that, well, it also means that there's fewer projects that are going to qualify, so the $255 million in round one may not be fully utilized, which then can be spread out over the next two rounds too. I'll be honest with you, I don't think they have a clue as to what this is going to do and how it's going to turn out. All I know is that originally, when Doug and I had a conversation right off the beginning about when we went through the grant, we talked about CEQA. I told him my experience with CEQA on a number of other projects, and it can be a lengthy process.
Yes, it can.
And Doug made the comment and said, well, you guys are likely going to file a non-deck anyhow. A non-deck is a document, it's really a one-page document that says that we don't believe that there's any significant environmental issues, and so therefore we don't think this applies to us. Well, that phone call I got on Saturday changed when he says, yeah, in review now, I think that creek is going to create a bigger problem than I thought, so yeah, we're going to have to do it.
In the parking lots too.
Yeah. I mean, just to kind of put it out there, and again, I need to speak to the county. I haven't addressed with the county yet, and I will. Is that what would happen if the county says, no. We can't have a parking lot coming off of Watt, coming in a small, and then having traffic coming off and coming back in on Watt when it's 45 miles an hour and it's on a turn. We can't do that. If that happens, can we still develop a park there? Yes, but it might be more of a very a low impact nature type of trails and stuff that people can walk from their homes, and there is no parking. I don't know, but that does concern me. That I thought that from day one is that especially when I found out that the likelihood is we can't enter off of the school parking lot. There's just no access. And I can't remember, Scott, what was the name of the street around the corner we looked at where the Delaney? That's an access point, but it's not an ideal one at all. It makes you walk a very long, narrow corridor along the creek to get to the park. And I think from safety aspects, that probably wouldn't be a good idea. So it goes back to, can we access parking off of Watt? Well, that's going to turn up in the CEQA process. It's going to tell you, we've talked to the county, and it's yes or no, and then we have time to figure out what our next step is. But it's a unique, You know, there might be reasons why that piece of property has not been developed in 40 years.
Well,
I mean,
ever since I've been here, we haven't done it because we haven't had the money.
but even if we had the money, if we hadn't done the CEQA process, maybe we always assumed that it could be developed.
Right.
But unless you do that, you're not addressing the specific issues. And so,
So are there plans to meet with county, who would that be, traffic? I'm assuming transportation?
I'll start with planning,
Okay.
because see, the planning, I went back and talked to some folks I worked in Napa from the Public Works Department, who really initiated all our CEQA documents. And planning is usually the starting point, and they'll pull in traffic, they'll pull whatever parts come in. And then what we would do is hire a firm to kind of navigate the district's interest with the counties instead of me directly dealing with them, because I'm not an engineer, I'm not an expert in those areas. And so I've already been looking at firms that do this, which would, depending upon the amount, may trigger the need to do an RFP as well to make sure that we make it competitive and we get a good firm, rather than just picking one out of the phone book, that sort of thing.
Well,
So,
I understand that Ms. Richards going to have a lot of time now, so she can help you. Nancy.
How did you hear that?
you know, I'm disappointed in the sense that, including, especially with the board and the staff, we all put a lot of time into those 5 meetings. And I'm disappointed because we were on track to have our application done. We'd gone through and you know, there's a few areas that we weren't super strong in, but I thought we could get stronger, and that is getting, I think we had one, what do you call it, partner. And ideally, I'd like to have 3, because then I get max points. So this actually gives us more time to do it. I'm not worried about the funding cycle. It's going to be approximately $200 million the second go around. But it is what it is, and didn't see it coming. And I've heard there's a lot of concern out there from public agencies that this has kind of changed things for everybody. But when I suggested to Doug that rather than force an application that's going to be rejected, would he agree that the best move would be to pull back, reorganize, and look to the second round? He says yes.
Yeah, why waste all the time to put it
Yeah.
together?
Yeah, I mean, you know, as you know, he doesn't get compensated unless we get rewarded with a grant, so he wants to do it the right way as well.
Yeah.
So coming back in September, if I run into a problem, then it could be October, but I am hoping that in the next month I can get at least the basic questions answered, because going forward, you know, I think that when I was talking to my former colleagues in Napa, we had some pretty challenging parts that had the Napa River and a creek, and that CEQA process took 12 months. Well, this is not as elaborate as that, so I'm hoping the whole process is 6 months.
I was going to say, it could still be 6 to 9 months.
Could be, because there's a lot of work that goes into it. So anyways, I'm a little longer explanation than
No,
I
that's fine.
had planned on.
All right.
Thank you. Any additional questions? Thank you. Item 11, payment of bills. Does anyone have any questions? Hi, Alan.
So, on the refunds, the billing rental, what event got canceled for $897.50?
They had a wedding that was going to be in next April 2020, and they just decided that they weren't going to get married anymore. So they asked for,
Sorry.
they asked for a refund.
Okay. I mean, I saw the amount, it's like, what event?
No, it was really far out.
Yeah.
That they did.
All right. Thank you. Terry did a good job explaining it to me.
I don't know the buildings.
I'll make a motion to ratify payment of the bills.
I'll second that motion.
We got a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Motion passes. The next regular meeting of the Board of Directors will be on August 8, 2019 at 6:30 p.m. in the North Highlands Recreation Center, 6040 Watt Avenue, North Highlands. This meeting is adjourned.